Before we begin, I'm thrilled to share that my new book, No More Bosses, The Journey to Sustainable Self-Employment, which is published by Penguin, is on Amazon bestseller list. In the book, I get real about overcoming my own fear and self-doubts to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams. I share the framework I use, like fear setting, regret minimization approach, that help me get comfortable with the discomfort of change. I also open up about how I discover my unique strength and turn them into a viable business. Building my personal brand, developing an effective marketing strategy, assembling a killer support network. It's all in there. It's been a constant learning process to optimize my productivity and find that elusive balance. But trust me, it's been one heck of a journey. Now, whether you're already self-employed or just toying with the idea, I'm confident this book is going to provide you with the roadmap full of real-world guidance and inspiration. You can get a copy of No More Bosses at Amazon, Kinokuniya, or major bookstore. And now, back to the show. Hey everyone, this is Adrian Tan and you're listening to the Adrian Tan Show. Today we are bringing back one of our favorite guests. For the third time, Charles Ferguson from GP. If you are keeping count, yes, this is becoming a trilogy. And unlike my trilogies, this one keeps getting better. Charles, welcome back to the show.
Adrian, thank you so much, and what a warm welcome. I hope I can live up to the anticipation,
Now, for those of you who might be new to the show, Charles is the General Manager and Corporate Development Lead for, do I pronounce it as APMEA? APMEA?
Yeah, you know what? I say that sometimes, and it makes you think I'm saying sleep apnea, but it's a big region, right? It's Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa now. So it's a lot of opportunity to
So
grow.
that's the definition for APMEA at GP, formerly known as Globalisation Partners. He's had an incredible journey through tech giants like Intel, Microsoft, Salesforce, and he's here today to discuss GP's latest World at Work report, which is honestly mind-blowing in terms of what it reveals about the future of global employment. So, Charles, before we begin, what's the motivation behind this report?
Man, it's really interesting, right? So I would suggest, we've been around for 13 years as a firm, driving a lot of the, I would say now, mainstream idea of remote working and globalization as it relates to employment. And one of the, I would say the dangers as well as challenges when you go deep into a space like this is that you can start to kind of, drink your own Kool-Aid. You start to perhaps navel gaze a little bit. And the best way to ensure that what you believe to be true is actually true is to go out and have conversations with people, right? Whether they are directly the customers that you're serving, or in our case, both those folks, as well as the professionals that we employ on behalf of our customers through our model called Employer of Record model. So we go out, and now this is the second year running. We've had this conversation with around 6,000 professionals across 6 countries around the world to get a pulse check of not only is what we're hearing and seeing reflected in their day to day, but also, as is always the case when you have conversations with folks who are in the middle of something, we learn a lot. And you alluded to it, right? A lot of discovery through these poll questions and these engagements. So that's why we do it. It informs not only a temperature check of the market, but it helps us to inform where we need to focus our innovation and our go-to-market strategies.
And as I panned through the report, I was trying to pick up those bigger numbers that we can really drill into. So one of the key things that I picked up was that it shows 98% of executives plan to expand their global presence in the next 12 months. Now, that's huge because here in Singapore, we are seeing headlines about tech layoffs, economic uncertainties. Are these executives smoking something, or do they know something we don't?
No, look, mate, I think that, if memory serves me, you and I might have had a thread of this conversation the last time we got together, but it is the case that the early demise of globalization was grossly exaggerated. It has changed dramatically, and it's interesting to see kind of what's old is new again trending, right? So I'll give you an example. a lot of the folks that we spoke with are, yes, they are facing in some instances a dearth of talent in a particular area. And I know we can't get through this conversation without talking about artificial intelligence at some point. So we'll get to that. But that's one of the contributing factors that is causing folks to say, hey, we're going to have to look further afield to fill this requirement in our business because it's becoming, an extreme urgency for a lot of businesses to adapt and adopt. So there's a talent sort of, I guess, catalyst in that regard. There's also, whether we like it or not, there is a visitation or rekindling of the idea that we can find extremely, valuable and difficult to ascertain talent in our particular market for a lower cost in another market. So there are some economic drivers that are forcing folks to go out and look for, it's not low cost labor arbitrage. This is not a reformatting of BPO 2.0 sort of scenario. It's really about, if there is an economic benefit, that's an added bonus, but it is a contributing factor to people looking predominantly, frankly, in emerging markets. And the good news is that I guess that drive to explore those markets is not only predicated upon, a cost efficacy, it's also predicated upon the idea that, frankly speaking, the balance of access to young, ambitious, global talent has shifted away from the G7 to the E7. So 52% of the, let's call it sort of the global inventory of extremely ambitious, well-educated, youthful talent in the marketplace is now in emerging markets over that of the traditional sort of developed markets, if you will. And we see that in Singapore, right? It's not a surprise, but that's a contributing factor. And then I would also say, man, lastly, as it relates to the sort of global expansion story, it's also predicated upon the idea that we need to build some resiliency or some hedging into different aspects of our business. Jobs to be done in a local market, jobs that could be done through automation and AI, jobs that could be done by someone with talent in another location, but also as a contributor to kind of macroeconomic forces. You see things like the trade contest between China and the United States forcing businesses to say, we're not giving up on either one of those markets, but we need to have something in place to kind of balance the the reliance, I should say, on that particular relationship. So you see Vietnam and the Philippines and Thailand and countries in Africa, et cetera, becoming places of interest. And that's, of course, there's demand there and there's, market opportunity, but there's also a lot of talent. So that's an exciting development.
So from what I can tell, it's really trying to make best use of all the opportunities out there, given that we are much more connected right now. And I guess it's also
Precisely right.
because, again, something else from the report that really jumped out at me is that 46% of executives say finding skilled talents in their existing market is very difficult. Now, for someone like you who have worked across Asia Pacific, where do you think there's hidden talents that companies are overlooking?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. There are always going to be deep access points to talent in the traditional, and I say traditional by virtue of the fact that you and I are talking about the APAC market. Okay, so yes, India, the Philippines, China. These are tried and true 40-year contributors to global talent access that we know are there. However, and I'll add, supported by a lot of government investment, a lot of policy design, a lot of sort of alignment of public sector opportunity, as well as strong efficacy for bringing in foreign direct investment. So all those things are true. But what's exciting to see is that now with a lot of stability, particularly in ASEAN, we see this burgeoning interest around the world for investment into the Southeast Asian markets and an enhanced sort of alignment around the ASEAN region towards, I guess, making it even more attractive to bring in companies into places like, for example, setting up in Singapore and using that as a hub to go out from Singapore and tap into either additional markets for expansion and economic opportunity, and or access to talent. And that Oxford economics statistic that I pulled up earlier with you around the shift of emerging market sort of volume of access is certainly prevalent in Southeast Asia. So you see Cambodia making incredible investments into their education system, into FDI, I guess sort of ease of access, and even infrastructure, basic infrastructure is being greatly enhanced. Outside of ASEAN, you see places like Sri Lanka, where the government is making tremendous strides in pulling up society there from the catastrophic economic challenges they had over the past decade, and really reformatting such that there's a renewed focus upon empowerment and enablement for the youth that are coming up. A lot of countries like Sri Lanka have had this sort of knock-on effect of brain drain, where talented folks would come through the system, and because there weren't economic opportunities, they would go abroad and stay abroad. Well, now you see this renewed emphasis, this sort of focus on bringing those folks back, and with their exposure overseas, they're bringing back new ideas, they're bringing back investment, they're bringing back jobs, and these are wonderful, I guess, paths to follow as companies anywhere in the world are trying to find the next best place to either invest, or certainly by virtue of the mainstreaming sort of concept of global employment, to go out and find really interesting, untapped resources of really talented folks.
And on top of learning a new term at MIR today, I also learned another term from your report, Gen Global, which basically means the huge amount of, well, actually 85% of millennials and 84% of Gen Z wants to work for international companies, compared to just 62% of boomers. Now, you have worked across multiple generations across your career. Let's talk about this group of older generations, their resistance to global work. Do you think that's holding companies back?
I think that's a insightful question. I think that it's contributing to a lack of agility, right? In adapting to the new environment that we're operating in. I think there's a lot of let's call it sort of, I don't want to call it antiquated, but I'll call it traditional or legacy views of what globalization is. And historically that was, hey, your mess for less, right? We're going to throw it over the fence into a low cost market and focus on trying to control the quality output, but not really look at that market as a potential for our actual products and services. It's just a place to get stuff done cheaply. And that sort of hierarchical, if it wasn't made here, it probably isn't as good mentality has hindered a lot of businesses from tapping into the new wave of globalization that's clearly been warmly embraced by the younger workforce. And why is that? Well, it's because a lot of the, heretofore theoretical boundaries, not least of which manifest in the idea that you had to be in an office 9 to 5 to get your work done, right? Have evaporated almost overnight. I know that the rising crescendoed peak of the pandemic doesn't seem like it was overnight, but in the arc of time, 36 months is not really that tremendous amount of a time to have something so profoundly democratizing happen to so many people at one time, where the generation that was coming up into the workforce was, directly thrust into this idea that literally there were no boundaries. The only boundary was really in your mind. You contrast that with the question you asked, which is this older generation. I'm scraping on the other side of the baby boomers, right? I'm a Gen X guy, and our generation is the last generation to have kind of come into the workforce before the internet was mainstream, right? And but to be there for the rise of that, and this younger generation, I think about folks that are coming into the workforce today in their their early 20s, and I think about my children when they come into the workforce in 7, 8 more years. How remarkable the change has been in that course of time, how truncated and condense the amount of change has been. And it's now such that, and I know it sounds cliche and trite, but the way and means by which things are changing is happening literally on a daily, if not an hourly basis, where the technology is sort of innovating on itself. It's compounding like interest, right? And so I think it's very difficult for folks in the sort of the dusk of their career to grip how tremendous the change really is. So I do think that whilst I wouldn't say it's holding companies back, this older generation's view, I would say it does foster a culture of complacency, that some of these things are just going to kind of cycle through. And the reality is that everything is fundamentally changed forever. And the younger workers are right at the forefront of that, and they're embracing it, and they're going forward with, I think, a pep in their step. But businesses that do not understand that, businesses that do not allow the empowerment of choice in a lot of these areas are going to have a Darwinian moment sooner rather than
When we
later.
talk about change, the biggest change most recently would be AI. Like you said, we can't avoid not talking about AI. And that is also something mentioned in
Absolutely.
your report, that there's this power struggle perception with AI, because 60% of executives
Yeah.
think employees benefit more from AI, while 58% of employees think employers are the biggest winner. Why are we so paranoid about who's winning the AI game here?
You know, that particular statistic, my interpretation of it is that, perception is reality, right? So both sides of that argument are right. Um, on the one hand, which is such a cliche MBA answer, but let me explain my answer. So on the one hand, I do think that employers are looking through the lens specifically of the economic impact, obviously. And employees are looking at this as an opportunity to, deliver on the things that they hold dear, right? They're looking for opportunities to grow and to learn and to find purpose and to remove sort of, rote, repetitive, menial tasks off their plates. They can focus on their core competencies and really the adventure of learning while you're going through your career. So I think that if you put both those things together and you look at it holistically, both sides are accurate, right? You're going to have, increased access to information, a democratized participation in the future of the direction of the company, of the work that you're doing. Simultaneously, the productivity is going to be greatly impacted, and hopefully in a positive way. And the economic, impact of all of that is going to, behoove those employers who embrace it. I think another area that we all need to focus on is not just sort of like the promise and the case studies of some successful practices, but it's really about how you prepare both your employees and your company and your board and your stakeholders to adopt these technologies. It looks really sexy, and, you see the demo and you think this is going to solve world hunger, and you bring it into your company. And then, like all things, when new technologies or nascent technologies get introduced into a firm or into a culture or environment, they fall flat because the company doesn't really know how to truly adopt it. So I think, my advice to businesses that I speak with is, look, you're not going to be able to gain all of those benefits from day one. You've got to have a plan, and you've got to get started. So, do believe the hype, but be pragmatic and do some areas of focused experimentation and learn the lessons of those experiments, draw out those successes, and use those as the baseline to go and expand further into the business. But it's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. You've got to start and then roll out systematically. And most importantly, Adrian, you've got to communicate clearly and bring the company on the journey, right? It can't be an isolated scenario. It's got to be transparently communicated and very clearly articulated what we intend to do and how we're going to do it, and bring everybody on that trip.
And I think you just got to keep that going. You got to give it some time to marinate.
Yeah.
Don't let it be another of your New Year resolution that just pan out February.
That's a great way to put it, man. The New Year's resolution syndrome of AI adoption cannot happen. It's not going to be good.
Now let's bring the attention over to Singapore. Singapore is always positioning itself as a global talent hub, and your report shows that 53% of workers globally are looking to switch jobs in the next 6 months. How should
Yeah.
Singapore
Yeah.
companies approach this? Are we about to see a massive talent exodus or influx?
I think that Singapore is always sort of riding along the knife's edge when it comes to the balance between productivity, foreign investment, and talent migration, attractiveness. Cost of living is a huge issue right now. Um, Prime Minister Wong has got only a few real tools at his
Mm,
disposal, along with Monetary Authority of Singapore, to drive inflation down and keep prices in check. And a lot of that happens to do with with currency control, et cetera. But when it comes to I guess this perception of desire to change with workers and looking at new opportunities, I would suggest there are two great things that Singapore has in its favor to kind of keep that talent from at least leaving, which is it's still a highly attractive global destination for global businesses. And the other statistic, that was interesting was that I think it was 92% of Singapore employees that were polled said they were interested in working for
mm,
global companies, right? So global company doesn't necessarily mean packing my bags and going abroad. It means that I can work for a global firm out of Singapore. And because of that, I guess, conduit, that access point, I'm able to go perhaps on an assignment or work with folks on global projects, et cetera. And that satiates that desire, that
mm,
strong need that particularly Singaporean workers have because of our position. Singapore has always been, from independence, a a global hub
mm.
of trade, a global hub of kind of talent access, a globally minded um, position in the economy, because that's all that we have in terms of our resources is our
Mm.
people and our innovative ideas and the way we position ourselves. So I think, I do realize that that is a concerning statistic that people are, considering leaving their work. But I would suggest that the way to stave that off is to indeed plug into this global
Mm.
phenomenon, to embrace some of these opportunities that are brought to bear through the advent and adoption of artificial
Mm.
intelligence, because that creates this sort of, when you go traveling and you've got a Singapore electric plug, but you also
Yeah.
have an adapter, and you plug that thing in, and suddenly you've got access to the juice, right? The global mentality, the global positioning that Singapore has, and the willingness to adopt new technology are the electrical adapter for
Mm.
our plug, right? And if you can put that together, you're going to be able to stave off some of the concerns these employers are going to rightly have of people
Mm.
jumping. And younger workers these days, frankly, are more, I would say, more accustomed to or more used to the idea that it's not employment for life at
Mm.
one firm, right? It's an opportunity to learn from great people and then move on and learn something new from another great group of people in another firm, et cetera. The way to mitigate that, as I said, is that empowerment of choice and kind of being aware and open to the idea that change is not just incumbent upon the employee, but also upon the employer.
I love your analogy on the universal travel adapter, and I think it's a good
Yeah.
segue for us to talk about this other part of the report that mentioned only 26% of executives want to set up their own entities in new markets. Now, as someone who's
Yeah.
been in both traditional corporate roles and now with an EOR provider, isn't that sounds a bit like corporate laziness? Why aren't companies willing to put in the hard yards anymore?
Yeah. Look, yeah, I would say to you, I've seen a rationalization. Before I was working in GP, I worked for a global corporate
Mm,
services provider, and their primary drive in their business was setting up entity structures around the world. Right? It is not a bad idea to set up structures when the time is correct within the I guess the development
mm,
of your business. In fact, even within GP, we tell our clients, hey, look, at a certain point, you're probably going to want to establish your structure and stand yourself up in this particular market because the opportunities are there, or there's a litany of benefits. Um, and certainly not just from an opportunistic upside point of view, but also things like permanent establishment and tax
mm,
compliance and a whole litany of other what might sound like a bit of a yawn factory to some of the people listening to this conversation, compliance is key, right? So the traditional method was basically, we are interested in this market, so we're going to fly over there. We're going to sit down with the lawyers and draft up the incorporation documents and lodge them and incorporate and set up the bank accounts and blah, 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 blah. That creates a whole of both opportunity on one side and also risk and exposure on the other. If that particular market doesn't work out the way that, our strategy consultants told us it was going to do, or the way that, the research I did online said it was going to manifest, then if you think setting up is difficult, wait until you try to unwind an entity structure, right? Wait until you try to extract yourself from one of those markets. I mean, it is inordinately difficult. And the other issue is that you are subject to the vagaries of government policy, which, in today's highly volatile environment with a lot of interconnectivity between macro political, macroeconomic sort of calamities and opportunities, policies change, tax regimes change, health crises come up, and governments need to put in place new sorts of policies to address, economic requirements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So do you want to spend your time dealing with those areas of minutia, or do you just want to focus on growing your business, the economic opportunity? And part and parcel of that is the maintenance and the governance, government's risk and compliance around entity and sort of adherence to regulatory environments in different countries is constantly changing. So in some instances, not in all, it is better to just, let's call it, partner with someone like an EOR, who at least in the first instance can say, okay, we're going to hire talent for you, bring them on. You can test this market out. And if it has the veracity and the impact that you thought it was going to have, then go down the path of setting it up, right? And be formal in that business, or rather in that country. Or, another thing that I see very often in some countries where it's a little bit more, compared to Singapore, a lot more onerous, right, to set up. Some places 12 to 18 months is completely par for the course, right? So do you want to wait for 12 to 18 months to get into that market? The way the world is operating right now, the speed at which is required to take value from these markets? Well, obviously no. So why don't you do two things in parallel? Why don't you use a model like an EOR or something akin to that to get into the market whilst you're going through the process in parallel of setting up, right? And then those things can dovetail, and you can simply port that talent off of one vehicle onto the new one and go after it. But a lot of businesses have too many entities, too many structures, too difficult to manage. And so they're rationalizing as well, trying to get more asset light and thus reduce the risk of exposure.
It's a corporate equivalent of renting instead of buying, or maybe rent first. Test it out, see how it goes before you decide to invest the money and the COE to buy a car. And, while you're renting, if you don't like it, you can always cut the lease. It's such easy to exit from the entire deal.
Adrian, that's right. And you know what? It's not only about kind of like the example you just provided with the entity story, it's also about talent. So when a company makes a decision to hire someone on, it's a big decision, particularly for smaller companies, right? Smaller businesses. Everyone knows this, but I'll state it for the record, right? In a company's P&L, the most significant investment, the most significant line item on a profit and loss statement is what? Well, it's salaries, right? It's people costs. So before you make that type of an investment, which is a significant investment, use an EOR provider or a contractor or however you want to go to the market and find that talent and try it out, right? Before you maybe bring that person to your country through an immigration process, or before you, set up a structure to go into a new market, or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, try the talent first and then inculcate the culture, make sure there's a fit, and then bring that individual on full time. Or rather, in the case of EOR, they are full time. But before you, indoctrinate them into the full fold, maybe bring them to the mothership, try before you buy, right?
Try before you buy. And looking at all these different data points, AI adoption, global hiring, remote work, if you had to bet your career on one major shift in the next 5 years, what would it be?
The mainstream adoption of the artificial intelligence hype cycle that we're
Mm.
seeing right now is literally going to be bigger than the internet. It is going to significantly change not only the way that we work, but also the way that we hire. Um, the types of jobs that people are going to be taking on to add value. You know, Adrian, I've said this for, decades, but everyone freaked out I believe it was either the 1700s or the 1800s when the automation of the loom happened. You recall the movement
Yep.
called the Luddite movement, right? Anti-technology. Well, look, I'm sorry, but they were wrong. It's an evolutionary cycle. How many people do you know today that are employed as switchboard operators?
None.
How many people do we know today that are sitting inside the lift to ask you which floor you want to go to? I mean, there's a litany of jobs that have disappeared. I'm using air quotes for the listeners, but the reality is they didn't really disappear. The fundamental macro skills that were involved in some of those key elements, key contributors to the economy that I just mentioned in their time, those skill sets don't disappear. The application changes, right? So the way and means by which we work today is certainly going to be augmented and forced to adapt and adopt to the new technologies that are being brought to bear. But, look, in 1994, when I was working at Intel Corporation, we didn't have the internet. It was an academic sort of communication channel at the time. Well, fast forward, it's now, 2024. I'm still employed, I'm just employed in a much different capacity. So my prediction would be that out of all these things, the world will continue to globalize and get smaller. The interconnectivity will become more significant, but as will the nationalistic tendencies of a lot of these economies and business countries. But I would also suggest that the impact of AI and its predecessors, right, will be so much more profound than we can imagine. And you've got to prepare today.
Awesome. Now, on more of a personal note, you've been with Intel, Microsoft, Salesforce, now GP, with so many multiple tech waves that we have seen right now. Of course, you talk about what keeping you excited about the future of work, but what's personally are you looking at right now? Are you planning on certain stuff on that note, or are you secretly planning to retire to a beach somewhere?
Well, it's funny. Someone asked me this recently in an interview about, Charles, what age are you going to retire? And my response was, I'm never going to retire. I'm probably going to change the way that I work, but I can tell you, man, the ability for companies to support their workers through positive mental health, I think is going to be something that I'm going to continue to lean in and focus on. And it's because of the fact that I think there's a perennial fear, which we just touched on when I mentioned the Luddite movement, during the height of automation and manufacturing, of, people somehow being left behind, people losing out, isolation. With remote work becoming mainstream, I think a lot of people don't know how to operate in a remote environment. So for me personally, I consider myself to be uniquely privileged, and I'm very grateful to work with a business like GP that allows me to be remote. But I also want to take the lessons that I've learned and the things that I've seen both work and not work and share those with people so they can understand how to operate in these very, kind of uncharted waters, right? And that's going to be something that I do believe can be, scaled a lot more efficiently and effectively through the embrace of these new technologies that are coming out to now, let's say, automate process right now in its nascent stage. But I believe in the future, the notion of co-pilots, as they're often alluded to, or agents, as the new buzzword has been coined, these things are going to become literally virtual you. Yeah, it's going to be two in a box. There's going to be things that the virtual part of your work persona can do. There are going to be things that you as an individual can do. The challenge is going to be how to strike a balance between those two things and maintain a focus from the company point of view on the mental health and well-being, physical and mental and emotional support for the worker. That's going to be critical.
I love that parting shot because ultimately when we talk about work, when we talk about AI and all that, we often neglected the people who would be using
Yes,
those technology, or will still continue to be part of the whole machinery, so to speak? So it's good. It's good to
absolutely
hear from
right.
you that your focus is there. Now, before we wrap up, since this is your third time on the show, let's play a quick game. If you had to hire 3 people from anywhere in the world, no restriction, living or dead, who would they be and why?
Oh, anyone living or
Yes.
dead?
Yeah.
Who and why? Wow, awesome. And hire them?
Hire them.
Okay. Let's see. I really admire. Well, this is going to sound so cliche. I mean, I would hire immediately Lee
Hmm.
Kuan to be my
It's going to be
strategy
hard to
leader.
manage.
Yeah, I know he's going to be super hard to manage. He's a chief strategy officer, so let him go. Just give him a pen and a whiteboard and let him go. Um, I would hire
Hmm.
Jimmy Carter, the former president of the United States, to be my head of international expansion, I believe. Um, and you said there were 3
Hmm.
options, right? I would probably hire Andy Grove to be my
Hmm.
technologist to go out and help me to drive the international expansion that Jimmy puts out there. The strategy that Mr. Lee puts
Mm.
on the table. I'd put Andy in charge of putting the products together to go out to the market.
Nice. That's awesome. Thank you so much for participating. Now, that's all the time we have for today, Charles. Always a pleasure having you on the show. For listeners, you can find the full World at Work report on GP website, which I'll add into the show notes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review if you enjoyed this episode. And also, if you're keen to find out more about Charles himself, I will be adding his LinkedIn to the show notes as well. Thank you, Charles. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Adrian, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.